make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
And basically, she told a nurse or someone, a provider there, the circumstances of what had happened with her miscarriage. And so she was reported to the authorities for how she disposed of the fetus. This is a circumstance many women find themselves in, just miscarrying, going to the bathroom. So anyway, she is now being prosecuted for not disposing of the fetus in a way that I guess the prosecutor deems appropriate. I think this prosecutor has not been through many miscarriages himself.
Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by my ever faithful friend, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. Well, thank you.
Hey, and today we are speaking with Katie Paris, who is a known political strategist and advocate, particularly focusing on engaging women in politics. She's the founder of Red, Wine, and Blue, an organization that aims to mobilize suburban women for progressive causes. Her work often involves using unique strategies and platforms such as social media and informal networks to encourage political activism among women, especially in suburban areas. So a very warm welcome to you to be on our show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you.
So I want to start just by maybe figuring out what inspired you to kind of make this, a cause that you're fighting for, diving into, the political strategy and the advocacy and particularly focusing on women.
Oh, the big question. So I actually have worked in politics for my whole career, which, due to the negative stigma around politics, I always feel like I should put up my hands and guard my face or something. But we're working on changing that. We've got to normalize engaging in our politics. But I really, from when I graduated college, I was working on campaigns. And always loved that work a great deal. I lived in D.C. for over a decade, and I moved to Ohio, which is where I live now, just over 10 years ago. And I started Red, Wine, and Blue after the 2018 election. And that was because, one of the big storylines you might remember coming out of that election was about all these women, particularly in suburban areas, who were becoming engaged in politics for the first time. And a lot of it had to do with Donald Trump. He had been elected, of course, in 2016. And so there was this backlash among women who said, this cannot be our president. This cannot be the person that my children are seeing as president of our country. I have to do something. And so they came out of the woodwork and became involved locally in politics for the very first time. And so there was a big question coming out of that election. Well, what's going to happen with these women now? Is it going to be that was just a one-time thing? They're going to go back. Some of the pundits on TV sort of pejoratively said, are they going to go back to brunch? As though that's all we women do in our lives, is brunch. just insanely ridiculous. Yeah. And I just became really interested in these women. And here I had been involved in politics for a very long time, but I just loved the idea of, wow, what is getting all these women newly engaged? And so I think for me, in the meantime, I had moved to Ohio. I had become a mom myself. I just had my second child. And I was feeling like, I don't know, maybe my work that for so long had been more centered in Washington, D.C., maybe that was no longer my highest best use. I think you all know I come from a faith-based background too, and I'm constantly sort of pursuing that search of calling. Mm-hmm. And so for me, there was a real loud call the day after the 2018 election. And I didn't know what exactly it would lead to, but I knew it had something to do with women and politics and women who live far outside the confines of Washington, D.C.
That's really cool. Well, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, but so Josh and I aren't women, but we're both married to one. We are both married to one, and combined, well, for me anyways, combined with the fact that I've obsessively watched all of The Handmaid's Tale. Haven't read the book though.
I have to admit to you, I actually have not watched it. And I think the reason why is because it came out when I was pregnant. It must have been like 2018 or something. I had my second child in 2018. And so I was interested because there was so much critical acclaim. And I had so many girlfriends say, do not watch it while you're pregnant.
That's a smart move. That's actually smart.
I need to.
You have very wise friends because I mean, as a man watching it, I was just livid because you watch this thing and you are like, this is us. This is becoming us, and it's hard to just kind of escape watching what you're seeing and then looking out, into the real world and saying, oh my goodness, and okay, so I've admitted I'm an avid watcher of Handmaid's Tale. I've also watched the Barbie movie. Which I love. It's pretty good. But and I am kin enough. Yeah, that's how you say it. Anyways, I feel like even despite all that, I'm not well equipped to answer the question I'm about to ask you. And that's what's the biggest threat right now, you think, to women?
It feels, I think there's maybe an easy answer to this that I actually, which would be to say reproductive rights. And I think that's incredibly real. And it's been a huge issue that we have been organizing around, with such passion since the fall of Roe v. Wade across partisan lines. I actually have found this to be an incredibly unifying issue. People talk about abortion as, it's as a polarizing issue. I actually really disagree. I think we have seen, the majority of women, again, from Republicans, independents, and Democrats come together with just the visceral power of women caring about something. And it's not just about abortion. It's about, reproductive rights. It's about freedom. It's about agency. To make the decisions that are best for our families. It is a family issue, And so I think my answer is reproductive rights, but, and the threat that is still just posed all across this country to women being able just to access healthcare. But I just want to emphasize how much bigger I think that this issue is. It's not just a single issue. It represents whether or not we live in a democracy, whether or not we all get to make decisions, especially those that are most intimate, for ourselves, or whether, politicians or women in families are best suited to make those most intimate decisions for themselves. And the reason why I see this as such a unifying, galvanizing issue is that the answer to that is quite obvious for most people, regardless of political party.
Yeah, and I'm curious to get your thoughts really about two particular ones that come to mind. The woman, I can't remember her. I think it was Cox, was her. Yeah, in Texas. Mm-hmm. And then another woman in Ohio recently who miscarried.
Ohio. Yep.
Yeah. So I'd love to kind of just get your quick thoughts on those two particular cases in the context of what you just mentioned.
I mean, it's a great illustration. I think that, we heard a ton about Kate Cox's tragic story in the media. I think that we heard less about Brittany. We did an action about this at Red, White, and Blue, an African-American woman here in Ohio, not far from me, actually, who miscarried. She's still facing prosecution. And both of these circumstances have to do, I don't know if you all may have already talked about the details on this show, but both instances.
No, could you maybe just summarize each of those cases just in case we've got folks that don't know?
So Kate Cox in Texas, she basically needed an abortion to protect her life, this is about the life and health of the mother. The doctors determined that she did need an abortion for those reasons. She got a judge to give permission, given the laws in Texas. They have, very strict laws about when an abortion is allowed and when it's not. And then that judge allowed the procedure to go forward, but then that judge was overruled in a higher court. And so she ended up having to leave home, to go out of state, as many women have had to do since the Dobbs decision, to save her own life and to protect her ability, to protect her health, to protect her ability to be able to have children in the future. So the idea that it is somehow pro-life to force her into a situation where she would actually be prevented from creating life in the future and to protect her own life, I think really says all you need to say about the misuse sometimes of political labels. So then we had, you guys, I can't possibly be a part of like everyone who has not lifted up her full story. Kate Cox. I just want to speak.
No, it's okay.
Brittany Watts. Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I just can't not say her name. We need to say
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Brittany Watts, and that just speaks to the fact that I couldn't even recall it right away, as there just hasn't been the same level of media coverage at all. And I think it has a lot to do with, just bias that we have in our coverage and who, gets attention sometimes in these stories. But Brittany was sent home from the hospital saying that she was absolutely going to miscarry. But it needed to happen. I think that she was not able to, maybe for legal reasons, or maybe that was just the doctor said, you're going to miscarry at home. She did that, as many women experience. Basically, they miscarry going to the bathroom. But then her bleeding was really excessive, so she had to go into the emergency room. And basically, she told a nurse or someone, a provider there, the circumstances of what had happened with her miscarriage. And so she was reported to the authorities for how she disposed of the fetus, I guess. This is a circumstance many women find themselves in, just miscarrying going to the bathroom. So anyway, she is now being prosecuted for not disposing of the fetus in a way that I guess the prosecutor deems appropriate. I think this prosecutor has not been through many miscarriages himself. So, I mean, again, it's just like politicians inserting themselves, saying that we know better about women's reproductive health care than they do, than their family does, than, working with their own medical providers to do, what's best for themselves and for their families. So, that was maybe a little too much detail. The details can be really painful. Sometimes we have to confront these details because these stories that make it into the news represent just a tiny fraction of the very real stories women are facing. When the Dobbs decision came down, we had thousands of women sharing their personal stories, either their own stories or women close to them, of being denied access to abortion or getting abortions, and sharing stories, many often for the very first time. It felt very important to them for the first time to finally vocalize these stories so that we can recognize how prevalent they are, and therefore why it's so important for women to have control and agency in making these decisions, and to have these decisions be their own and not a politician's. So that shared sense, every woman has a story of someone close to them, if not themselves, who've been impacted by being able to access reproductive health care. And so it's just, that's a bond. And it's an incredibly powerful bond when it comes to fighting for something together. So it's been really powerful to be a part of for the last couple of years.
That's really amazing. Thanks for sharing all that, Katie. My wife and I went through an experience of miscarriage ourselves, and we were at a hospital because of our stances on abortion. We actually switched doctors because we felt like the ones that we had were really pushing us to have an abortion when we had said we didn't want to. And they continued to kind of push us in that direction. And so we actually went and got a new doctor And when we actually had the miscarriage, so they had to call an ethics committee at the doctor's, a Seventh-day Adventist in Ohio. We were in Ohio. All three of my children have been born in Ohio. I live in Virginia now, but we lived in Dayton for 6 years, Dayton, Ohio. And they had to do a ethics board. They had to call them and get permission. And it's funny because we actually appreciated that. And my wife chose, like, it's interesting because I guess I'm pro-life, but then when it was my wife's life, right? Because that's what they're saying. It was my wife's life in danger, because her water had broken prematurely. And so the danger of infection was increasing every day. And so it was interesting because I wanted to give her the choice. I was like, I can't possibly make this choice for you. I don't even know what choice to make. I can't possibly make it for you. And so I think that, like, it was interesting because that entire experience revealed a few things to me. One, it's a very complicated issue. It's not black and white, especially as a husband, when you hear that your wife could die if the baby is not aborted, or is not, if something doesn't happen, right? And you're like, from a man's perspective, I was like, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do. Like, I don't want to say, we want this baby. We were very, very happy about having this child and wanted this baby. And Bethany, we got to name her. We got to hold her, actually. But this was such a difficult and complicated and messy situation. And I guess, what do you feel like is the solution in terms of acknowledging the messiness of it, protecting the life of the unborn baby at whatever point it becomes a human or a child, or any of those things, setting those questions aside, protecting the life and the interests of everyone involved? How have you seen that, like, work well, and how have you seen it work really badly?
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like,
yeah, it was hard.
Really
devastating.
I'm sure you probably think about it every day. It just impacts your heart and your relationships. And that is truly the only thing that every single situation has in common, that it's complicated, that there's nuance, that it's impactful. But other than that, you're right. There's just so much complexity. And I think that's the thing that so many of us really understand. And that's why we think that, because of all of the complications and the nuance, it needs to be the decision of the individuals who are involved, rather than some sort of blanket law that can't possibly incorporate all of those nuances. It's just impossible. A 1,000,000-page law would leave out certain circumstances.
Of course.
So I think for that reason, look, I think that Roe v. Wade and the standard that set, was reasonable. And I think that that's why we're seeing such strong majority support in state after state for, here in Ohio, we just passed issue 1. And I was very involved with that, red, white, and blue. And, thousands of women throughout the state were, across party lines. And that's what issue 1 reinstated, essentially is what we had in place in terms of where we were with Roe v. Wade. And so that is, getting rid of these blanket bans. And it's because in Ohio, did we not pass issue 1? Our state legislature has already passed a 6-week abortion ban. So that is what we would be going to. And so now instead, the woman and her family can make that choice up until viability. And I think that that is what you have to allow for that complexity and nuance. And you have to recognize that only you, Josh, and only your wife in that circumstance, because of all of the life experiences, your own plans for the future, your contextual knowledge about her health and, mental health, everything together, only you all in consultation with people that you trust. And you didn't feel like you trusted the first doctor. So you found another one. That's also part of your journey. And so only you all could sit in those seats and make those decisions. So I just think we have to have laws that empower the people who are most affected to be able to make those choices.
That's super cool. Just I feel like we started this interview kind of on a very dark tone, so I'm going to try to switch topics a little bit and talk about maybe a lighter topic of political activism. And I'm curious.
I was saying, working on these issues is like been one of the most empowering, hopeful things I've ever been a part of. Though, like, look what we just did in Ohio. Look what women in Kansas and Michigan and all across the country have done. Like, from this dark place, have like dug deep and worked together and accomplished like beautiful things.
It is, yeah.
So, yeah, sunshines and rainbows at the end of the darkness. Let's hope, right?
So I do want to talk a little bit about your political activism, especially kind of in the world of suburban women, and was curious like what strategies have you found that seems to be the most effective in encouraging suburban women to get to the polls, to be more active with politics?
Yeah, so the heart of what we do at Red, White, and Blue is called relational organizing. It just means friend to friend, family member to family member, folks in your social circles, the people that you know. It's really as old as time, like whenever you want to get something done, right? You reach out to the people you know to talk about what you care about and what you might be able to do about it together. In modern sort of politics, we have shifted to the more traditional campaign tactics are where volunteers enlist with a campaign and then they reach out to strangers through texting and door knocking and postcards and letters and all those ways. And what we know is that if any form of communication is actually exchanged between people who already know each other, it's a whole lot more effective. Which just sounds pretty intuitive, right? I mean, because it is. But it's just become more and more true in a day and age in which people are far less trusting of news sources and just sort of institutions and folks in positions of authority. We trust the people we know, kind of like full stop. So at Red, White, and Blue, what we're focused on, and this I think is really important for suburban women because we are all about our networks in our communities, right? Whether that is, I mean, look, I'm a soccer mom. I'll own up to like the stereotype. I totally am. And it's a really strong network. Who was I partying with on New Year's Eve? My soccer mom friends, right? So these are really powerful networks because we are tied together in our communities through our kids and other things that we care about. And so our goal is in getting women to feel confident to talk about things like voting and elections and issues with the people that they know. That's called relational organizing. That's relational voter outreach, just talking to the people that you know. And getting them to maybe, if they already vote, getting them to care a little bit more so maybe they talk to 5 friends too. And getting past the assumption that, oh, everybody I know votes. Well, guess what? Just look at the stats in America or any community, any suburb, anywhere. There are huge percentages of people not voting. So guess what that means? It means that you and I have a whole lot of power to impact the outcome of these elections if we can just dig deep and find some confidence to have these conversations. So a lot of that for us has to do with making politics feel a whole lot less like a TV, like cable TV news show, which frankly, like that's not so appealing to me, or most people. But instead to make it feel more like friends getting together to get things done that they care about. So we are trying to, at Red, White, and Blue, make politics feel like friendship, to feel like sisterhood, and just to feel a lot more approachable, relatable, no judgment. It's okay not to know everything. Like, dang, girl, you're busy, right? But like, come on over here and we will like hook you up and figure this out together. And so I think by sort of having that sense of approachability and like, hey, we can do this together and we can actually have a good time along the way, and that this is going to feel nothing like 2 people battling it out on television, we have found that is something that people are a lot more likely to want to get involved in. Like my favorite thing to hear from women that we approach is like, oh, well, if this is politics, I'm all in. It's kind of redefining the whole thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Every idea, right? It's like a virus. If it's really effective, it'll spread around and along. the matrices and along friendships and your relationships. And that's really, I love that. Except unfortunately now ideas have like extremely wide reach with politics. And so it can be even more viral, so to speak, but it still makes that connection through your connections with other people in many ways. Well, I'm interested in how do you guys handle conflict? Like in your discussions, like say someone comes in and well, I could just say my wife, she would be very, very pro-life. Someone else would be very, very pro-choice. Talking about, say, something like abortion, we can move to a different thing too. Any of these, I don't know which political issue isn't, doesn't bring conflict and, tension. But what do you like? How is it that you work through those things? What kind of things do you encourage in terms of conversation, about things that that are very, very important, obviously, and also very, very controversial. And it's like a crucial conversation just built into it. It's highly emotional. The stakes are high and, you really care about the outcome and the person that you're with. So how do you guys handle that? How do you encourage conflict, differing opinions, things like that to be worked out amongst these groups?
Yeah. So it all comes down to seeking shared values and sharing personal stories. So you just said that your wife identifies as very strongly pro-life. Well, what you've also shared with me during this conversation is that your wife had I assume it was like a real trauma to go through in terms of her own personal story, right? Of experience of needing to terminate a pregnancy to protect her own life. And I would guess that story has led her to have really nuanced views about that issue.
Absolutely.
And so so we could start a conversation instead, say, okay, raise your hand if you identify as pro-choice, raise your hand if you identify as pro-life. Or we could start a conversation by saying, who here has had a personal experience with this issue? And I guarantee you every single woman in the room is going to say that they have, either for themselves or someone close to them. I've had 2 miscarriages. Nothing as as scary of a situation as you went through, Josh, with your wife. But I've had a DNC as well. We all have had these experiences. And so I think by starting there, you immediately you're instead of having a political conversation, you're having a personal conversation. And along the way, when we're having personal conversations, we recognize shared experiences. We recognize shared values. So I would just say coming to these conversations with a sense of curiosity, it's asking questions. And as we go and we're sharing those personal experiences, you are bound to find that shared value. And I would just say the last thing I think is so important, and this is something we always have to work hard at, is allowing people to make mistakes. Like we're going to say the wrong thing sometimes. We all come from different cultural contexts, political family backgrounds. Something may land on your ear very different than on my ear. It may bring up different stuff for me, and just recognizing that that's going to happen along the way. And so how we handle that with each other, and to try to take some of the judgment out of it, to both be seeking to learn from each other rather than judge each other. Everything I've just said is way easier said than done, but it's in the trying, I think, that matters.
I think it's so spot on, and especially it's relevant given the state you're in. Your governor just recently vetoed, a trans bill that would have made it very difficult for somebody to get gender affirming care or what have you. And when you read like the details of it, he made the decision after talking to families, and I'm just like, what, why is this such a radical idea? Like, shouldn't that be what everybody does? When you were about to, write a regulation or something that's going to affect so many people. So I'd love to kind of just get your thoughts on it. I know that you had posted something about it on Twitter. So I'd love to kind of maybe get your thoughts about, what does that mean? How does that impactful? And then, how does that just represent everything that your organization's been trying to do to get people just to talk to each other?
Yeah, that was a really beautiful thing that Governor DeWine vetoed that legislation that, was forced through we have a pretty extremist, conservative, Republican supermajority here in Ohio that doesn't really represent the people. We can talk about gerrymandering in another conversation, but, you could see with the reproductive rights vote last year, 57% of Ohioans voted for that, whereas our Republican supermajority had voted for a 6-week abortion ban. Like, there's clearly a gap between where the majority of Ohioans, and I would say the majority of Americans, stand and where currently the Ohio state legislature stands. And we're not the only state where that is the case. But I think Governor DeWine did listen to parents. Actually, in this case, I know some of those parents who have transgender kids and have been on their own journeys. These are journeys that these parents have actually shared with a lot of moms and women in the red, wine, and blue community. This peer-to-peer learning aspect and moms learning from other moms who have had experiences. I don't have a transgender child. I don't know what that experience is like. And there's so much that I don't know, that so many of us don't know about that. And so it's so important for us to learn from each other. So this is another good example of where, as I said before, on abortion, instead of us approaching an issue and saying, are you pro-choice or pro-life? Or are you pro-gender affirming care or against gender affirming care? The problem with these labels and sort of these soundbite political terms for complex issues is that people don't even quite know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Gender affirming care, people have in their head some extreme surgeries or, things like that. That's not what we're talking about. And so we are really talking about mental health care and making really incremental decisions informed by doctors and mental health experts in terms of what's going to be best for each individual child, proven evidence-based decisions that we know are going to improve their quality of life, reduce risks of greater, mental health problems and, suicide risk in the future. And so, when people learn, if you ask a question in polling, do you support gender affirming care or not? I think what we know is that we don't find huge amounts of support because there is a lot of confusion about what that means. If instead you ask people, do you think that parents should be able to decide with their transgender child, what is the best healthcare for them? There's no question. There's massive support for the parents instead of politicians making that decision. Again, because it's nuanced. There can't be one law for every situation, for every kid in every set of circumstances for what the right way to go is. So instead, what we need to do is allow there to be that agency that for parents to be able to decide that in an informed way with healthcare providers and with their child so that they can make the best choice for them. So I think that's simply what he did. It's actually a very mainstream view when you put it in those terms. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have a really interesting situation coming up here where our state legislature will, it looks like, try to override him. And I'm looking forward to making sure that the mainstream moms of Ohio have their say.
Mainstream moms. I love that.
That's great.
That would actually be a really cool T-shirt or bumper sticker or
mainstream moms.
Yeah, but I love what you said because I'm a believer, and as a believer, I realize that I've got a responsibility to just love on people the way that I'm supposed to love on them. And several years ago, we did a series during Pride Month. And each week we had somebody talk about some aspect of the LGBTQ issue or problems that they're facing in the country. And the first one we did was we had a person on, a friend of mine actually, came on that talked about pronouns. And I learned so much because in the media and stuff, some of these terms just come up out of nowhere, and you're like, what? Like, okay, like I gotta use pronouns now, and so I texted my friend. I was like, and she's a lesbian, and I was like, hey, can you come on the show and tell me or talk to us about what pronouns are? And she did a great job, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it now. And then we brought on a doctor who performs gender affirming care, and asked the doctor all kinds of questions. And it's funny, like gender affirming care is very similar to critical race theory in the sense of these aren't new concepts. they're just like the most recent, like, GOP boogeyman kind of thing. And I just learned so much. So I really feel that, as a country, I totally agree with you that if we just remove the label, just treat people as humans, what needs do they have? Disassociate any sort of political party or agenda, just meet people where they are. Like, we would just be in a much better place. And I can't commend you enough for the work that you're doing. But what I wanted to ask though is like, how can men, husbands, boyfriends, whatever, be a part of the advocacy that you're doing with Suburban Women?
Well, we run all kinds of programs and offer all kinds of ways to take action, and men are absolutely welcome to take part. You can sign up for our relational organizing program, where we are helping people get the word out about important issues and elections to the people that they know. That is not, you don't have to be like a woman or a mom to participate in those kinds of things. At Red, White, and Blue, it is a women's community. These are women's spaces, but that doesn't mean that we're not like cool with like the men who love us. So it's a women's space, but you're welcome to like hang out as long as you approach it with that kind of understanding. But also this is about, like help us shift the ideas about what political engagement means and what leadership means, right? And like the kinds of ways that we need people to engage. I think that politics for a long time and leadership, and this is for obvious reasons, right? Like still haven't had a female president, still have all of our legislative bodies like totally dominated by men, not at all reflecting what the actual population is. And I think that's because these have been male-defined spaces. And so that means that like the typical traits that we associate with men and with masculinity are what we associate with leaders. And so that's why it's hard when women try to step into these roles. It can be very confusing because people are thinking, wait, something doesn't belong. What's wrong with this picture? There's just something about her. Could it be that she's not a man? And so, but it makes sense that we feel this way. It's like we've been conditioned by society to expect something different. And also, even when it comes to women who are stepping into these roles, we try to assimilate because we've also been conditioned by society to think that leadership is supposed to be like kind of a male thing. So it's interesting. You'll see women sort of, using maybe a lower tone of voice or, trying to take a certain kind of command of the room instead of maybe being more naturally who they are in other settings. And I just think like we need both genders recognizing and encouraging that we are only going to be able to like figure out our whole mess of problems that include men and women of all ages at every stage if we have like men and women of all ages like participating in our democracy, including in our leadership. And so just recognizing the way we've been conditioned, recognizing that, hey, maybe that's not so great for us. And that I just think it's going to take both genders, like us all just being a little bit more conscious of that and looking for a better path and supporting women coming into leadership, not just in like, okay, I guess we can like, let's get a quota now of women, but like, oh no, actually we need this. We need to have a representative democracy. We need to have women showing up, bringing those just like amazing traits that, and these are generalizations, right? But what we associate with being more feminine traits in terms of consensus building and deep active listening and God, our politics needs that stuff, right? So like, let's not just like let it in. Let's like encourage it.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it's fascinating what you're doing. It reminds me a lot of my own sense of like how the gospel in my own life, right? I'm an agent of the gospel. That's what I consider myself in terms of my calling and how the gospel spreads. It moves around networks of relationships, right? The people you trust most, right? Those are the people that you want to listen to, not someone knocking on your door, asking if they can come in and pray for you or whatever it is, right? And not that people wouldn't do that, not that people have bad intentions or whatever it is, but those kinds of things aren't necessarily met with a lot of encouragement or in our society in terms of people coming in and just strangers knocking at the door and stuff like that. So I love the structure of what you're doing. And the question I have kind of around that, and this is going to sound like it's a trap maybe, but it's not. I promise you it's not.
I'm ready.
What I'm trying to, like, I'm genuinely curious about this. Like, cause even in my own family, right, we have I have, I don't know, 13 nieces and nephews, and then my own kids. And I'm the youngest of 5. So I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and half of them or more kind of feel like there's this sense of like, hey, this fluid identity, like they're very much like they almost like they want to reject any idea of gender at all. They just want it fluid. They don't want definitions. They don't want any of that stuff. And as it's moving forward, as we're progressing, right, with the organization, as you're getting the 20, the kids that are 18, 19, 20, they're continuing to grow. They're making more headway in society, creating more impact, all that stuff. How do you see the organization shifting? Do you see it shifting? How do you envision kind of tackling this major kind of, it seems like a major thing, right, of this gender fluidity in terms of like, especially if it's a space specifically for women. Like, I love that it's a space specifically for women, but that's because of my own views and my own sense of how reality is. And people have a lot of different senses of that now. And it's very difficult for me to wrap my head around it and enter into it. I want to, and I don't know how to, and maintain my own sense of identity. Honestly, I'm trying to figure that all out. So what do you think? Have you thought about that? Have you guys worked through that in the war room, quote unquote? What kind of, how do you envision that?
Totally. And I appreciate the question and just like your willingness to sort of muddle through, because I think that's like what we're all doing.
No doubt.
I think that
some more than others.
I mean, if you're being honest though, right? Like that's when you're really being honest, I think. I think that one thing that we just always have to do to stay honest with ourselves is just to lead by listening. And that first and foremost, I created Red, Wine, and Blue to increase engagement in the political process, among suburban women. And that table is, I mean, look, I even said, you guys can come hang out, and participate in our programs. But yeah, that certainly includes, we have, people who identify as non-binary or, anyone who's like, identifying as a woman. It's totally cool. And I think and one way in which we try to listen well is to create the space for these conversations. So one thing we do pretty frequently, for example, is we have AMAs or Ask Me Anythings. And it's so like we've had AMAs like with someone who identifies as non-binary, but didn't really discover like that identity until their 40s and uses the pronouns she and they. And like, what's that whole process? And she's like, still like discovering it herself, she's fine with either one in that. And so why is she fine with either one? Let's have those conversations. And she wants people to stumble through their questions and sort of not quite know the right thing to say because she's still trying to figure it out too. And we've done the same thing with, I think I mentioned before, we've had moms of transgender kids, and they come on and they share the mistakes they've made along the way. And maybe they'll even make some mistakes during the Zoom call, but we all kind of learn together. And I think more than anything, what people appreciate is there being that no judgment space where they can come and learn. Because I think the most dangerous thing actually is that when we pretend that we have all the answers and that we have all this figured out, and that I can give you some like business plan for red, wine, and blue over my 5, 10, and 15-year plan on how we will approach these super complex, nuanced issues. So all I know to do is to set a table that is welcome and opening and affirming and inclusive, and invites the conversation and doesn't shy away from it and doesn't say that, oh, this is bad or taboo or anything like that. Because really what I genuinely believe is that by having these conversations and by not sticking so firmly to maybe what we learned when we were younger, it's actually an invitation to create greater connection and sense of belonging among all of us, because it's an invitation to know each other on a deeper, more authentic level. And I mean, what's cooler than that?
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so in the remaining time we've got left, I'm going to do a little punditry if we could. So
no pundits.
It's 2024. At the time of us taping this, I'm just going to say there's going to be roughly 300 days until the election. You mentioned earlier that we haven't had a woman president yet. I think that Nikki Haley probably has as good of a chance as any, assuming what happens to Donald Trump. So love to kind of get your thoughts about the future. Obviously I think everybody on this call would probably be okay with Trump not being in the White House. But if not Trump, then would Nikki Haley be sort of the best, I don't know, like the next best option? I don't necessarily think that, but I think that she could probably solidify some Democrats because, first woman president, right? So like, what's not to like until you kind of dig into her policies. So yeah. So speak your mind or don't speak your mind. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts.
Yeah, Nikki Haley is not going to be a nominee for president. Like, I just think that probably the best way for us to go into this really huge year for our democracy is like with very open eyes. Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. And that is a huge threat to our democracy and to, I think, everything that the country I want to live in, the country that I want my children to be able to live in, their children to be able to live in. This is go time. I feel confident, actually, going into this year. I think that we can do this. I think that we just had a pretty darn good year for democracy in 2023. And so I feel ready and I feel optimistic. But this is, to me, it's just like, that's like just playing an imagination game. You know what I mean? Like she's like 35 points behind South Carolina, where she's from, So it's an intellectual exercise, I suppose. But I think that it's probably, if all three of us agree that Donald Trump would not be great to have in the White House again, then I think that we just really need to focus on preventing that from happening and recognizing that there's not going to be some little hiccup along the way that stops that. It's going to be a lot of hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you, especially kind of in the context of the work you do, like how do you get through to a woman Trump voter and convince them, through relationships that he doesn't necessarily have your best interest in mind? That because it always just is mind boggling to me when just basic facts you can Google or about his stances on certain things that are just very counter to the way that you want to live your life. Like how do you even do that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, something that I do think is important to say and that we talk a lot about in our community is that, people who voted twice for Trump and are very committed to wanting him to be president again, I am going to say that there's maybe a better use of your time. And I also cared so deeply about your heart and that I just don't want you to maybe expend all of your time and spiritual energy on that conversation, so that is not what we are here to do. It's just to exhaust people and leave everybody banging their head against the wall because they can't get through to that person who is just so committed to Donald Trump. However, I think that there are always openings. I mean, Josh, you voted for Trump once, you didn't a second time. I think that's so awesome. And like anyone who changes their mind, I just like commend, it just shows open-mindedness, and we need more of that. And I think that there are a lot of openings in terms of, back to reproductive rights. I think that so many women have had these personal experiences, and it lends them to think a little bit more deeply about who are the candidates that are going to have my back. And if I were ever in a situation where I needed, like Josh's wife was. And I think that we have to be willing to have those conversations, and where there is an opening, kind of like have enough bravery to have that conversation with those women, while recognizing that not everyone is necessarily open to that. I think that Donald Trump recognizes that this is a real problem for him. He sees the salience of reproductive rights. He is concerned, has vocally said that he's concerned about suburban women. Republicans have been losing support among suburban women in recent cycles because of him, because of the Dobbs decision. And he is going to work hard to, despite the fact that he is the reason that Roe v. Wade was overturned, he appointed the Supreme Court justices that led us exactly to this point. He is going to make it seem like he is moderate somehow on this issue. I actually think there seems to be some view among voters. I've seen some data that indicates people think he's personally pro-choice, but politically, basically strategically, quote unquote, pro-life. You know what I mean? So he wants to, get the evangelicals, as he would say, like to support him, so that then he'll sort of posture. How cynical is that? Like so basically like reproductive rights are good enough for him, but too good for you. That's all he's saying. That's essentially what it is. Like, fine. I don't think Democrats should spend a lot of time trying to convince anybody that he's not personally pro-choice. I think we just need to expose how terribly cynical that is, that he's okay, that if it impacts him, he's absolutely going to go and pay for someone to get an abortion if he's the one who got them in that position. But no way is he going to let you get one if your life is in danger, because he wants those votes. Like, you articulate that to most women in America and a whole lot of men who love them, and I think he's going to have a real hard time on that issue.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking, the hypocrisy amongst politicians is so it's so thick, it's almost overwhelming. I was thinking when you're talking, like Biden and some of his own statements, and that he is personally pro-life and yet politically. And I've heard that a lot from a lot of different Democrats who are Catholic that I've talked to. And it's like this weird thing.
Josh, I got to quibble with you though. That is not
Go ahead.
Hypocrisy.
I can't.
It's not hypocrisy. If I am saying that I personally, my choice is going to be to not have an abortion, but I'm not going to take away that choice from you, both are allowed. What Donald Trump is saying, I should be able to be above the law. There's a different set of rules for me than there is for everyone else. If you are saying the same rules apply to yourself as everyone else, that's consistent from a legal point of view. I mean, you can say.
I was more thinking about like how people would say something like they're personally pro-choice, but feel like personally pro-life, but then again, feel like, and everyone should be pro-life. That's kind of this sense of this idea, but they're not going to do that. They're be pro-choice. But I hear what you're saying, that there's
a lot of Americans actually feel like, based on their own personal experiences, and I think that a lot of people who have even ended up getting abortions would say this. Like, I never thought I would. I felt very against that, maybe for personal, religious reasons, whatever.
Sure.
And then I found myself, or then I found my daughter in whatever set of circumstances. And so my views changed. And so I think that, like, I'm cool with that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really care what label you use. I think that it reflects the complexity of the issue. I think that people can so for me, I don't care what you call yourself. I care about everyone having access to the same standard, the same choices. And so that's why I find like the Donald Trump position so deeply hypocritical. And frankly, it's the same as how he is about everything else, right? Like, okay, we'll have rule of law and whatever is like, however I can get elected, whatever gives me more power. And then, but then I get to do whatever the hell I want, you know, and the same thing applies even in this case. And I think that, you know, fundamentally that is real out of step with the American way.
Yeah. I agree with you on that one. So we have a lot of people on this program like that listen to the program, obviously very wide political spectrum, very wide religious spectrum, believers, non-believers, people that, believers in whichever God, right? Hindus, Muslims. We've had all sorts of different people on the program and people that listen to the program. What would you feel like is your, like, the thing you really want to say, the most, like, the one thing? I don't know, you've been saying it all this time, but if you were to crystallize it into something like a few sentences, what is it that you want them to hear from your heart as we come into this next election season, which we're already in, and it's going to be coming full swing here soon?
Yeah. Thank you for that invitation. I think it's like your voice matters more than you think. You are more qualified than you think to weigh in on anything that weighs on your heart. You are qualified because of your life experience, and you're qualified because of your relationships. And because you are in relationship with so many people in your life, that puts you in this really special, beautiful position to, yes, influence your friends, but in the process to strengthen those connections between you. Like, let's all be like brave enough to have those conversations that maybe society has conditioned us to think like, oh, we're not supposed, right? Well, you all are doing all of it here, right? We're not supposed to talk about faith. We're not supposed to talk about politics. But what if we do? What if we do?
Totally.
I mean, I just met you guys, and like, I feel like I could totally like hang, go out to dinner, you know, with you and your wives, whatever. It would be great, you know, like, and I think it happens more quickly, I would guess, with guests on your podcast, because you're talking about faith and politics. Like, you're going there, you know? So maybe these like lessons that we've been conditioned to learn are like all wrong, you know, and unlearning some of that stuff, like, take the risk, unlearn it, like, just authentically connect on these areas, and you just might surprise yourself at that you can not only move in a place that is consistent with your values, and you can have, you know, more people like going to the polls right alongside you or fighting for that issue that you care about, but it'll also just like feel really good, because it feels good to do things together. It's empowering, and it creates deeper connection.
That's so
cool.
good.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Katie.
How can people get connected with Red Wine and Blue?
Well, hit us up on social media or in our inbox. We have a website. It's redwine.blue. You heard that right. Redwine.blue. And we're all over all the social media platforms at Redwine Blue USA. We've got, you know, private Facebook groups that are popping off every day in, day out, every minute. And we put lots of video content and graphics out every single day. And we just invite you to be a part of the conversation with us, or email us at hello@redwine.blue. So many ways to enter the conversation. We have, I started Red Wine and Blue just a few years ago. We have almost 50 people working at Red Wine and Blue now. And we all just love to connect with other folks out there. So,
and you have a podcast too?
And we have a podcast called The Suburban Women Problem.
Yes.
Nice.
That I know you all had Rachel Vindman on here, who's one of our hosts. And they talk about politics every week, like from the perspective of, you know, a few suburban women who are out there causing some good trouble, which is what we like to do at Red, White, and Blue.
That's so awesome. Well, thank you, Katie, so much for coming on our show.
Yes,
chatting with
thank
us.
you.
This was super informative. And we just wish you good luck and many blessings on the work that you're doing. It's